Welcome to the premiere episode of the Renewable Energy and Climate Talk by the PACE Energy and Climate Center, or R.E.A.C.T by PECC. I'm Mike Hamersky, the Executive Director of the PACE Energy and Climate Center, and with me is my colleague Emma Lagle, Energy Policy Advisor.
Great, thank you, Mike. This is the premiere episode of R.E.A.C.T by PECC. So we're going to be, introducing this new exciting kind of project to our audience, and we're going to be talking about the work that the center has been doing and will be continuing to do, and how this podcast and also a R.E.A.C.T newsletter will be used to kind of discuss and get the work that we're doing out into the community. And so I thought I'd kick us off by asking you a bit about yourself. You're coming out of nearly 2 decades in private practice, now working at Pace Law School and in the climate law space. What motivated you to make that switch from private practice to climate law and policy?
Yeah, sure. So, after 18 years in private practice or so, I saw sort of what was happening around me, the problems in the world, the urgent climate crisis we're in the middle of. I felt a bit powerless to act. And being a lawyer, I kind of, followed the prescribed steps to try to do something to make a difference. So I came here to Pace Law to get my LLM in 2022, finished up in 2023. I was fortunate enough to be hired by Pace at the Land Use Law Center, where I was working on climate change and land use policy. And then in about a year and a half, I was elevated to this position at the Pace Energy and Climate Center, and I'm just really eager and excited to address these really urgent problems with, forward-facing solutions. I feel like part of my frustration in being part of academia is the discrepancy with how we talk about the problems and the urgency needed to address them, but the sort of slow speed at which solutions are actually implemented. So I'm hoping to speed up the process with sort of a new generation of energy and a new generation of motivation to get real solutions with the speed we need them with. The fact that I was able to come over here right across the hall and work with folks like you has really made me excited. So why don't you tell me about some of the projects that you've worked on over the past years that inspired you?
Absolutely. And so I think I'll start just a bit with kind of my background as well. So I started at the center in this position in June of 2022. So it's been just over 3 years now. Before that, came to PACE as a JD. I also have a master's in environmental management and graduated into the pandemic. So kind of different paths where I knew coming into school that I wanted to work in the environmental and clean energy space. But definitely graduating into May of 2020, I had to do a bit of pivoting, and I had focused a lot on land use, kind of the kind of flip that we've done there. But at the time, there was a position open for a fellow at this center under your predecessor, and I decided to go back to school for 1 more year and get my LLM in energy and climate law, and really recognized, both through the work that this center was doing at the time and has always been doing, and kind of finally getting into the energy law and policy space, that this is an area. And this is, PECC is an entity that is bridging the gap between, the academic side of research and the actual implementation and working with communities. And so, like I said, I kind of came back after completing that LLM to the center full-time in June of 2022. And one of the first projects that I started working on is called ECLIPSE, and that's an acronym actually for the Erie County Low Income Program for Sustainable Energy. And so we were the principal working with Erie County up in Western New York to develop the first county-operated community solar entity and project in the state. Here in Westchester County, where our law school is is located, we have a group called Sustainable Westchester that runs the kind of first community solar kind of entity and project in New York State. So we partnered with them to work with Erie County, and it was a really great experience. The focus on stakeholder engagement and building coalition at the local level within the city of Buffalo and throughout the county with different community groups, obviously the local government themselves, stakeholders within NYSERDA and the solar industry. It was a really collaborative process that ultimately resulted in the development and launch of the Eclipse program, which at this kind of initial stage of its existence services low-income households and is a means for low-income households who generally may live in kind of small multifamily housing or have other restrictions to accessing renewable energy to not only access renewables but to receive a discount on their utility bills by participating in this program. And so that was the kind of first project that I got to see from inception to completion at the center, and just a bit of a taste of the work that we do with communities around.
That's great, and I noticed deployment. I was lucky enough to kind of enter the center while you were doing some excellent work that is ongoing with thermal energy networks around Westchester. Can you tell us a little bit more about that work?
Yes, so thermal energy is an area that I think personally, through the work that I've been doing on it since my LLM. So back in about 2020 is when the Pace Energy and Climate Center, PECC, authored our first report looking at legal and regulatory barriers in New York State to what you had just called a thermal energy network. And for folks that don't know, thermal energy networks are this idea of scaled geothermal. You may recognize the term a heat pump. So it's the idea that you have multiple buildings on a shared loop. And why might we care about this? Well, we're trying to decarbonize our buildings, right? We need to get our buildings in New York State and around the country off of fossil fuels. And thermal is a existing proven technology that is used all around the world. And it's used actually a lot in New York and around the country on more campus settings. But the technology's evolved, and so we have to do a lot of work at the state level to develop the kind of regulatory frameworks to be able to scale thermal to make it a real alternative to fossil fuels to heat and cool our buildings. And so we've been engaged in a couple different ways with the state, with the industry, with municipalities, and hopefully on some future episodes of this podcast and through the newsletter, which we'll talk a little about more in a couple of minutes, we'll be able to really dive in for folks the work that we're doing on thermal, what we've done, and kind of what we're doing now, and a lot of the really exciting next steps, because we really are committed and motivated to help communities around the state kind of recognize the opportunity with this technology, and to recognize that not only is it a proven technology to reduce fossil fuel emissions from our buildings, but it could be an opportunity for a different utility model than the one that we have, that I would dare to say folks are not the happiest with for a couple of different reasons. So I'm definitely excited to continue the work under your leadership. And we'll definitely dive into a lot more of the details there on some future episodes.
Yeah, and what I so admire about that work too is its focus on lower and moderate income communities, disadvantaged communities who so often get left behind when these sort of big economic transformations happening, and one of my priorities going forward is to make sure that all communities are coming along in the clean energy transition. It's a just transition, whether that be right here in our backyard in Westchester or around the world.
Yeah. Speaking of around the world, I know that you have a definite interest in international climate work, and I think under your tenure, the center will be continuing to do more work on the international level. Is that correct?
Well, that's the goal. That's the goal. So my passion is really ocean governance, which isn't exactly on all fours with the Energy and Climate Center, but oceans affect everybody, right? And there has recently been a trio of advisory opinions from international courts, most recently from the International Court of Justice, which basically says unambiguously that states, whether they are parties to a treaty or not, are under an obligation to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, to implement regulations to ensure that private industry doesn't keep polluting and destroying the climate as they are. And although they don't say it, I read those advisory opinions, particularly the ICJ one, to immediately start to phase out fossil fuels. That's why I'm in this position to try to get off fossil fuels. That is why you are doing this great thermal energy network work to get buildings off fossil fuels. And the mission of this center, as told to me from its founder, Dick Ottinger, is to get off fossil fuels, right? So these advisory opinions couldn't have been a more opportune time for my tenure here. It's basically less than a month after I took over. But it's also just a few months before two major international conferences. In October, we'll be at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and in November, we'll be at COP30 in Belém, Brazil, working with our international partners, hopefully identifying new grassroots organizations and NGOs we can work with. We have some ideas about, what role we can play as, an energy policy center at the #1 environmental law program in the country to sort of turn those advisory opinions into action, but we can't do it alone. So I'm hoping and I'm expecting that over these coming weeks we'll be able to identify some partners and really get some movement.
That's great. And will students be involved in any of this international work? I know on my end, we're since I've been at the center, we've really loved working with our law students and taking on the kind of the academic role seriously, and I know that I'll be continuing to involve our law students in the thermal work, in other work that we're going to be doing, getting back in kind of the rate case intervention space. But do you intend to kind of work with students on the international work in some other areas?
Absolutely, absolutely. As you know, PACE has a vast global footprint, and we attract some very talented international students. So right now we're working with a pair of international externs who are helping with interpreting issues arising from the advisory opinions and sort of how best to actualize those opinions into action. And I'm working with those students on producing sort of short, snappy scholarship that is not necessarily, the capital S scholarship that you would expect from a law review article, though we're working on that stuff too, but sort of the quick turnaround, easily digestible, easy to act upon scholarship that we're going to be including in our monthly newsletters.
Which I think is a really good transition into the monthly newsletter. And for our audience, we, as I think have mentioned, this is the R.E.A.C.T podcast, and we also have launching very soon the R.E.A.C.T newsletter. And so, I think as Mike was starting to get at, this is going to be not only an opportunity for, the center to kind of discuss its work in a digestible way, right? To let our PACE community know exactly what's going on here at PECC. But obviously, I think the broader, clean energy and environmental, law and policy community to really let them know the work that we're doing. But we're definitely going to be engaging our students for written content, as well as I think folks in the field and professionals within PACE and probably without to really highlight a lot of the different, I think, positive hard work that is continuing to be done, especially in an era, right, when I think we're hearing in the news and seeing so much about the rollback and the pushback to a lot of clean energy policy and economics. And so I'm really excited about this newsletter. What about it, are you most excited to launch?
So I say this even though it's a bit cringy, but it's true.
Cringe is okay. So.
Cringe, yeah. Our best asset right now is our students, right?
Absolutely.
I don't come here with, 20 years of energy and climate experience, right? All my experience in the energy and climate space has been academic. It's been at PACE, right? And the reason I stuck around here and the reason I took this job is for an opportunity to continue to work with the students and train the next generation of students and work on scholarship with students and find real problems with students. Or find real solutions to problems with students. So the purpose of the newsletter, in addition to sort of, letting the greater sort of energy and climate community know what the Energy Center is up to and sort of how they can get involved, is to highlight the work of the students, right? The most fun part of my transition here was meeting with students and hearing what they're interested in, right? Some stuff I knew they were going to want to talk about, data centers, right? Everyone wants to talk about data centers. A lot of students want to talk about battery energy storage. I wasn't prepared for how many students wanted to talk about nuclear energy, but that's the fun part of the job here, right? It's not a top-down energy center. This is a bottom-up center, right? It's us, me and you, harnessing sort of the work and the motivation of the students to create interesting scholarship that we'll put out in a newsletter and sort of, short, snappy articles, but also in working with those students to bigger, sort of more academic scholarship. Like we already in the first 3 months of this new administration, if we'll call it that, in my tenure here, we already have a publication, the Pepperdine Law Review, right? One of our executive board members, Carrington Lowe, and I co-authored a piece on the Tribal Energy Act. So, we'll be sharing that with our subscribers in the newsletter. I'm also working with a former LLM classmate of mine who's teaching down at Florida International on a piece on biofuels, right? And sort of the failed biofuels policies to date, whether that be here in the United States or in the EU, Brazil, Indonesia, and elsewhere, and kind of analyzing why they have failed and seeing if a truly sustainable, truly economic, viable biofuel policy can be created, right? If we would have had this discussion a month ago, I would have said, to create the ideal biofuel policy. I'm now less sure that one can be created, but that's why we do the research. So expect sort of big things from the Energy Center on, scholarship related to, international climate issues, the advisory opinions, sustainable biofuels, tribal energy issue, but also, a month-to-month sort of real reaction, no pun intended, in the R.E.A.C.T by PECC newsletter.
Yes, the name was selected for a reason.
Exactly.
Both responding to the kind of the issues of the day, of which there are many. The need for academic scholarship that we are luckily in a position to be able to pull on really close resources, our students, the PACE community, faculty, and also like kind of grounding in a lot, I think, of the local and state work that we do, and the communities that we do luckily get to work with, especially here in New York on a day-to-day.
For sure.
But the newsletter, the R.E.A.C.T newsletter, is definitely going to be a medium where we're able to share a lot of that, and to, I think, highlight how our students are engaging with all of these issues. And I definitely want to reiterate again what you said, that we are obviously, kind of have our own expertise, and we're also responsive and open to students coming to us with areas of interest, and seeing if there's ways to whether it's through a newsletter piece, or something maybe more in depth, support them in their research of something that maybe doesn't fit completely in the buckets of the actual formal work that the center is doing.
Absolutely.
But I am grateful folks are tuning in for this first episode, for this premiere, and I think that hopefully we can leave them off with a bit of a preview of what's to come.
Yeah. So we recently submitted comments to the EPA's proposed rule to rescind the 2009 endangerment finding, and we were fortunate to co-author on those comments with, I believe it's over 50 students here at PECC Law. Yeah. So expect a conversation with one of those co-authors to hit your feed soon enough. And going forward, we expect to have some wrap-ups from our work in IUCN. I think there's about 10 students going to that as well, so hopefully that can be a good conversation with some students who are there. I expect that we'll introduce our listeners to our executive board. I mentioned Carrington Lowe, there's Francis Gothard and Kenneth Sumter. And going forward, I expect to keep our audience abreast about all the interesting work that you and I are doing, sort of the core work of the center. And also, I'd be lying if I told you, I know what the hot energy topic will be in a month, so stay tuned.
Right, yeah, stay tuned, everyone, because we definitely will be talking about a lot of, and pretty much all the topics that we've touched upon today in future episodes in a lot more depth. In addition to Mike and myself and our students, there's definitely going to be opportunities that we'll capitalize on to have some guest speakers, some professionals in their various fields, and so this is hopefully the start of a really engaging and successful new venture of PECC. Creating new avenues, right, to communicate with the community and to foster kind of clear, accessible dialogue around issues that can be quite complicated, for those within the PACE community and those without. And so, really excited to have you on as executive director now, Mike, and to be launching R.E.A.C.T.
Well, thanks, Emma. I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in to the premiere episode of R.E.A.C.T by PECC. Much like Scorsese and Goodfellas, one shot. Stay tuned for the next episode.